Budget and budget justification. The budget and budget justification is for a maximum of 15 points, and it will demonstrate that your application includes adequate resources to carry out the proposed activities while ensuring that the proposed costs are reasonable based on the geographical location of the applicant. For the line item budget has a maximum of 5 points. It has 2 elements. The first one is that the application includes a line item budget with appropriate object class categories for every year of the project. So you're going to have to include a budget for each year of your project, a line item budget. The budget also fully details the costs allocated for federal and non-federal shares, and personnel should be delineated by full-time equivalent or FTE or percentage of time to the project. The second element is that the funds are all required items to successfully implement the project as described in section 4.2 content and form application submission, the project budget and budget justification. So the first thing we're going to start with is a line by line cost for all the proposed projects and expenditures in your application. And A&A specifically wants you to use the proposed object class categories that are on your slide. So let's review them all. I know some organizations or tribes have their own categories, but it would behoove you to adapt to these because if you go ahead and use your own object class categories, when you're awarded, A&A will make you switch them over. So you might as well get used to these. And it fits with all of our resources like our budget template, which we'll get into in a minute. Okay, so now back to object class categories. The first one is personnel. So personnel is very specific to salaried employees only. So these are all salaried employees that are getting their taxes taken out as part of their employment in your organization. So these do not include consultants or contractors or subrecipients, or maybe you have participants that are receiving stipends. They would not be included under personnel. So it's just salaried personnel only under personnel. The next one is fringe benefits. So these are the costs that the employer pays on your behalf as being a salaried employee. Some of them are pretty standard, which we'll get into, but we suggest that you work with your finance people to get the fringe package that you're going to be using for your application, just to make sure those amounts are correct. The next one is travel. So travel is for salaried staff only to begin with. It's, again, let me repeat that. Travel is for salaried staff only that are traveling usually out of state or overnight. So if you're doing just like a meeting in an organization that's only 10 or 15 miles away, you would not be putting your local mileage here in travel. That would go in other, and we'll discuss that later. So this is salaried staff travel, usually overnight and out of state. The next one is equipment. So equipment means it's an article of tangible personal property having a useful life of more than 1 year, and the cost is greater than $5,000 per 1 unit. So these are rather large items, and you need to include those under equipment. So if it's one single item that has a useful life of more than a year and is more than $5,000, you would include it in equipment. And just so you know, we'll repeat it again later, include a quote, either like the vendor quote or a quote that you found online as part of your application for every item that you put under equipment. The next one is supplies, and it's pretty narrowly defined as office supplies or meeting supplies. So those are, like paper and toner and paper clips and stuff like that. So those are under supplies. The next one is contractual. Not very many A&A applications include contractual. They are all pretty big awards. Like if you're subcontracting to an organization, as opposed to like a single consultant wouldn't be under contractual. If you were, let me use it for instance, if you were contracting a firm to do some type of recording and production of video, that you want to produce, that would be considered under contractual. But if you're just hiring, your local IT guy that can do it all, he would be under a contract, and that would go under other. The next category is other, which is the catch-all for everything else, as you can imagine. It could include consultants travel, local travel, insurance, utilities, rent, professional services, space equipment, printing, publications, computers. Remember, computers, they're not that expensive anymore. There shouldn't really be a computer that costs more than $5,000 and included under equipment. Again, remember, it's single unit. So if you're purchasing 4 laptops and it costs over $5,000, you still would include it under other. Any training costs, tuitions or stipends, staff development costs, everything else, if when in doubt, put it under other, and you should be good. And the next one is indirect costs. So these are either an indirect cost rate agreement that you have with your cognizant agent. So you would have an indirect cost rate agreement, and you can include it there. And in the absence of an agreement, you also have the option to choose a 10% de minimis rate. And we'll get into that more in the next couple of slides. So here we have a reminder to use the budget template. There's a version of it up on the screen there. The budget template isn't required, but it is so useful, and it's highly suggested that you use it. It has the recommended formatting that ANA likes to see. You will see that it has the category item as the first column. You have the federal share of what you're requesting from ANA. On the second column, the non-federal share, which is the contributions that you as an organization are including in your application, and then the total. This is the format that ANA likes to see. You'll notice that it has the budget cost categories already preloaded for you. It has some lines in there, gives you some helpful instructions. It also, what you can't see from this slide, is that it has all the calculations. It's an Excel spreadsheet, so it has the calculations built right into it, which is nice. So when you start entering salary in the federal share, it'll total it in this column, and also will total it down for each column. And it's just really helpful to you. So we highly suggest it. It's available in the 2021 pre-application toolkit. It is also recommended in the FOA. It is also available on our website at anaeastern.org. If you go to the resources tab, you can download the budget template there. So there are 2 versions available. There's the language version, and then there's the ones for the other programs. The language version just has extra notes and reminders that the first year of your project for language is a 9-month budget period. So it's just really the only difference, but you can use any of the templates and get what you need out of it. So that brings me to specific for language projects. I just mentioned that the budget period in the first year for language projects are 9 months. So that is both for Esther Martinez, immersion, and preservation and maintenance. Your first year is a 9-month budget period running from September 30th, 2020 to June 30th, 2021. You can still request that full ceiling amount of $300,000 for your federal request. And the remaining years of your budgets will be 12 months, starting from July 1st and ending June 30th of the following year. So this is what our sample project would look like. The budget for that sample project would look like. Here we have the personnel. So we have an executive director is 20% full-time equivalent, and their salary is going to be included in the non-federal share. So that amount has been included there. The next personnel would be a project manager, and they're going to receive their 1 full-time equivalent. So they're going to receive their full salary for the first year under the federal share. The certified nutritionist is 1 FTE. There's also 2 certified personal trainers are 1 FTE each, but these 2 will be hired 2 months into the project. So they're not already on board like the project manager and the admin assistant. So their salaries, and we'll see this in the justification, are for 10-month periods. And that's what is included in this column here. And then the admin assistant is half-time, and this is the salary for that person. The fringe benefits are noted. The FICA is pretty, I believe it's a standard rate of 7.65, and it's a calculation that's based on the salaries for both the indirect and for the non-federal share and the federal share salary. The federal unemployment insurance is this rate, and so is the state unemployment insurance, and workman's comp rate is given as well. It is up to your organization to decide if you would like to provide a retirement plan and or health benefits. That's totally up to your organization, and you can request them in your budget. It's just totally up to you. This project isn't doing that, but it's not required. Many people think that A&E projects require you to include retirement and health benefits, but they're not required. It's up to your organization whether you want to do that. So going further, here we go. We're going to move down into the next category, which is travel. So as we mentioned, post-award travel is required for the first year of the project. So that is going to be your program manager, your project manager, and your financial officer. It's going to be those two people that are responsible for the reporting. One's programmatic reporting and one's financial reporting. So this is training that's required usually within the first 4 months of your project. It's required to attend, and usually for the Eastern region, the trainings are held in Phoenix. So you can use Phoenix as your destination to get estimates, and you're going to be providing estimates for 2 people to get there. And we'll show how that's broken down in the justification part coming up shortly. And then the same thing for the A&E grantee meeting. It's just 2 project people. It doesn't have to be your financial officer. So it can be, in this case, it'll be the project manager and the nutritionist will go the first year. And this we suggest you put down Washington, D.C. as your destination to estimate costs to go there. And we'll show those breakdowns once we get to the justification. This, again, could be any travel, although we don't know how much travel is going to be coming in the next year due to COVID, but you can sure put it in there if you feel like you think that training will be held or travel. So remember, it has to be for salaried staff, overnight, and out of state. So maybe if you want to attend a health and wellness conference in Seattle, Washington, I'm not sure, you could add that for your nutritionists and probably your certified training instructors as well to attend, and you would include the cost for that. So equipment, again, equipment is for purchases that cost over $5,000 for 1 unit. And we have for our fitness project here 2 trainer packages. This is supposed to be rack. So 2 big fitness items over $5,000 each are included in your equipment. And then there will be an attached quote from either the vendor or an online search in the appendix. Supplies, again, these are consumable office supplies, and we'll show you how we calculated that amount. And then here's something that you can consider if you feel it's applicable to your project, PPE supplies. So we budgeted $5,000, which is part of their non-federal share contribution, but this would be really important, especially for this project where you have people going to a gym facility. So you have to make sure that the equipment is, sanitized between people. You have masks, you have hand sanitizers and all that stuff that is needed for PPE. Hey, so contractual, we didn't have contractual in this project, so that is blank. And the other are all the other costs that will be needed to implement this project. We have a tribal healthcare office. There's a contribution agreement that they agreed on to cover the costs of all those, doing the blood work for those people and doing those initial health screenings. So that's how they decided to work it out. We have a participants welcome package, which includes like a duffel bag, a Fitbit, and water bottle and towel and stuff like that. We have 4 Apple laptops for the 4 staff. We have a cost for that. the Microsoft Office suite. And so we have the cost for the licenses and the software. We have local travel. This is to attend meetings or go from site to site during the project. Classroom and meeting space. This is contributed from the applicant for this amount. Same thing for gym space and some gym equipment. There's a consultant for year one, which will be part of this year-end award ceremony. So the year-end award ceremony includes a motivational speaker and his or her travel. And then we'll see what the year-end award ceremony costs include. I believe it's a venue, some decorations, the food. You can pay for food as part of your A&A project when it's applicable. And we also have cell phones that we're going to provide for the staff at this cost, and it's going to be part of their non-federal share contribution. So when all those are total up, the federal share comes to $284,084. The non-federal share is $80,964. And the total project costs are all of these all added together. And we'll get to that in a second. The indirect cost is, we're assuming that this is a tribal organization with the indirect cost rate set at 14%. So this is 14% of 284. So this is the total federal share request at $323,856. The non-federal share is a total of $80,964. And here is the total project cost. There are all these numbers all together, which is federal share and non-federal share is $404,820 is your total project costs. So here these numbers indicate that this is the federal share is 80%. The non-federal share is 20%, which is required. We haven't talked about that yet, but we'll get into it in a second. And the total project cost is 100%. So since we're talking about non-federal share, let's get into how to figure it out. So up across the top, A&A non-federal share is 20% of the total project cost. That is the definition that is provided in the FOA, and that is the official definition. But there is also another way to figure it out. And this is the federal request. If you take your federal request and find out what 25% of that, it's going to equal the same as the total project cost at 20%. It's one of those math anomalies. I'm not a math geek. I don't know why that happens, but it is just one of those things. This is really convenient if you're just starting out your budget draft and you have figured out your total federal request that you want. So you have that first column completed, say it is $300,000. And now you have to say, well, what is the non-federal share that I have to provide? So you would take that federal request, multiply it by 0.25, and you get $75,000. So this is the amount that you need to include in your application for your non-federal share. So step two, you're going to take your non-federal share of $75,000, add it to your federal request to get the total project cost of $375,000. And then you're going to check your math, do $375,000, your total project cost, multiply it by 20%, and you will get 75%. So it just shows that you have made correct calculations. Okay, so now we're going to go into budget justification. So budget justification, they want you to describe the calculation and justification for each line item you identified earlier. So here are the elements for the budget justification. So the application includes budget justification for every year of the project, which provides a narrative description and breakdown of how costs are calculated for each entry into the line item budget. The budget justification includes rationale for estimating costs, vendor quotes for equipment, personnel, and travel. So this is a very important point I don't think I brought up earlier, but you do need to provide the line item budget and the budget justification for every year of your project. It does not really, doesn't benefit you at all if you include a 3-year total budget justification. Especially if you haven't provided those yearly ones in addition. There's no points awarded for having that total 3-year total budget justification and budget line item budget. So you don't need to do that, but you do have to do the the yearly breakdown for your budget and budget justification. So you have to include that narrative description of the breakdown of costs and how they're calculated for every line item budget. So then it goes on to the budget justification only includes expenditures that align with the approach in the OWP. This is very important. This is what I call the rule of three. If you had been following our training in the order that it's presented, you would have completed your framework, and then you would have gone into the OWP, and then in the OWP, it suggests to use the OWP as an outline for your approach for your project implementation. So if you do that, and then you use both your project implementation plan and your OWP to fill out your budget, you will have assured yourself that you have those three components in alignment here. So you need to align the budget, the approach, and the OWP. What we don't want to find is what we see sometimes is when we're giving the applications from grants.gov to review, it goes through the narrative, it has the OWP, and usually the budget's at the end. By the time I get to the budget, if I suddenly see a cost for a Ford 150 truck, then I have no idea, or it's the first time I'm reading about it, that means that those three components aren't in alignment. So while it is totally allowable to request the cost of a truck, I should be seeing that within your narrative, your implementation plan. I should be seeing activities that need a truck in your OWP. And by the time I get to the budget, it's not going to be a surprise to see it there. That's what we mean by alignment of those three components. And lastly, the element for the application provides information to demonstrate that the required commitment of non-federal share contributions. So this means that you have documentation of your non-federal share that could either be from your own organization through some kind of board resolution or tribal resolution, or you can get non-federal share from partners. If they're providing resources to your project, you would need documentation through like a letter of commitment in your application. Again, here's the plug to use the template. These are located in the tabs of that budget template. The first couple of tabs will be the line item budget for each year of your project, most likely year 1, year 2, and year 3. And then on the tabs, it'll start with the budget justification, and it will look like what's on the screen here. And the nice thing about the template is those line items that you included in your line item budget, they pre-populate this first column for you. So it mirrors your line item budget nicely. It's, it just helps you to be more thorough, and it'll line up in the same order and everything if you fill it out correctly. And then the totals are included. They'll pre-populate as well up here. And the only thing you need to do is include the justifications. So let's go through them. For the personnel and fringe benefits, you're going to include the position title. You're going to include the FTE, or the time commitment to the project. And you're going to include either the salary or the hourly rate, wage, and a brief description of the responsibilities as they're related to the project. For personnel and fringe, here's our sample from our example project. So we have these executive project. They should look familiar. These were all included in the line item budget. The totals were populated here in bold. And then in here, you have the explanation that is required. So the executive director makes $75,000 a year. He's at 20% for 12 months. So that amount should equal what is included in the line item budget. There's a brief description that the executive director oversees grant compliance. The project manager makes $50,000 a year. They're already on board, so they're starting for 12 months at 1 FTE, and then you give a breakdown that they're required to manage the project, do the programmatic reporting, supervising of staff, and project evaluation. The nutritionist, same thing. They're starting at $45,000 a year for 1 FTE, but they were hired 2 months into the project, so they're requesting 10 months salary for the first year. Then you give a breakdown of their responsibilities. Same for the admin. This is a person that's at half-time for 12 months, and we gave a brief description of their responsibilities, and the same for the the 2 personal trainers. Again, they were hired 2 months into the project, so you're only requesting 10 months of their salary. The fringe benefits, you don't really need an explanation here. They're all required. They're all pretty standard. You don't, an explanation here isn't necessary. Okay, for travel, you're going to include the purpose and the destination of the travel, the total number of travelers. You want to be in compliance with your internal travel policies. So you don't have to follow what you think ANA wants to. If you have internal travel policies, those are the default, and that's what you want to be using. You want to include things which are, airfare, lodging, per diem, transportation. There's ground transportation, like to and from the airport or to or from the hotel from the airport. Include all of those costs. So if your tribe or organization doesn't have set travel policies, you can use the federal rates found on the GSA website. So it's gsa.gov/travel-resources. And they can give you the cost, the federal rates for lodging, mileage, and per diem rates based on your destination. So here's the travel breakdown. So remember, the post-award training was for DC. We have the PM and the financial officer going, and they're going to Phoenix, Arizona. We're estimating the airfare. So that'll be really tricky. We hear gas airfares are going to go up due to the cost of fuel, but do the best you can. So that's for 2 people at $550 each in my example. We're going to include lodging for 2 people for 3 nights at this rate. And since this is an ANA training, this will be at that federal rate. So you can look it up in the GSA website and get more accurate price. So that's what I did here. The per diem rate is whatever your going rate is in your organization. The ground transportation is $30 round trip. That'd probably be from one person going to from home to the airport. And then there's another person who's doing airport parking at 4 days at $12 a day. So you want to include, if you add up all this, it will equal the amount that's included in the line item budget. And it's pretty much the same thing for the grantee meeting. It's going to Washington, D.C. Never mind that, it's the typo. And then all of these costs, the same thing will go and total up to what we're requesting in travel. For equipment, you're going to describe the type of equipment being requested, the number of units, the cost per unit, and remember that equipment has to be $5,000 or more for 1 unit. Description how the equipment will be used for the project, and provide quotes as attachments. So let's look how we'll go into supplies first. So supplies, group them whenever possible. The typical ones are office supplies, workshop or meeting supplies, or farming supplies. Break down estimated costs and describe how the supplies will be used for the project. So equipment is those 2 packages, those 2 workout packages. They're equipment for the new gym that's going to be set up, and you see that the quote is included in the appendix for both. The supplies, the PPE supplies, include disposable masks, hand sanitizers, sanitizing spray gun, cleaning solutions for use in the gym, workshops, and meetings. Average costs have been estimated at $500 a month for 10 months. So it is included. That's why they requested $5,000, or they're going to provide $5,000 as part of their NonFederal Share. The consumable office supplies are just typical office supplies for administration. They have a typical cost of $100 a month for 12 months. So they have that $1,200 request. Contractual, you're going to provide the name of your contractor, description of the services, breakdowns of costs, and the special parameters for subawards. So usually don't feel bad if you don't have a contractual. Most projects don't, most ANA projects don't. They are for those larger contractual items. So the next breakdown budget cost category is other. So you can include that description of the item, the breakdown of the computation of cost, and describe what each is needed for the project. So we have the description of the healthcare office. So there's a contribution agreement for the quarterly lab work and health screenings. It's estimated at $3,800 per participant times 10, because there's going to be 10 participants. And then they broke it down into federal and non-federal share in the line item budget. And so it also see agreement and appendices. So this is important, especially if it's anything to do with the non-federal share, because you do have to document your non-federal share whenever possible. The next one is their welcome package. So they broke it down to journal, gym bag, water bottle, towel, Fitbit at $400 per participant times 10 participants. The laptops were Apple laptops. So they give a breakdown of what they're getting for the amount. It's a 16-inch MacBook Pro for the PM nutritionist, 2 CPTs with 1 terabyte storage, all the core processors, the memory, and any software that's included. We have cost for Microsoft Suite, local travel. So they're going to go on hiking trips and, part of their fitness program. So they estimated at 1,000 miles at 50 miles an hour. 50 cents a mile. Classroom meeting. Again, these are included in their non-federal share. So you will see attached letter of the commitment in appendix for anything that is non-federal share. You could even add in here, this is non-federal share, put it in parentheses or something. You could do that. That would help make things especially clear. Consultant, we're going to have the consultant, we're going to attach their resume in the appendix. And then the travel, we broke down travel for this consultant the same way we did other travel. And this amount will equal what we're requesting. Here's the year-end ceremony. So we're going to have food at 20 people at $35 a person. We're going to have the venue for 200, decorations and incentive for participants. So all of this should equal the amount that we included in the request. And then there's the cell phones. Okay, so for indirect costs, those who have a negotiated indirect cost agreement with the federal government, indicate that in your budgets and indicate that what the rate is and include it in your request. You also should include a copy of the agreement as an attachment. And there's a lot of people that are in the process of renewing. So just give your most recent agreement and include that in your application. And then when it comes finalized, when you're an awardee, and then you can make adjustments after that. For those applicants who don't have that indirect cost rate agreement, you can claim the standard 10% de minimis rate. And that is based on the modified total direct cost. So we also suggest as TA providers that you give us a call and we'll help you determine that modified total direct cost. There are a few rules that you need to know that will give you the correct rate. It's not just a straight 10% of all your requests. So give us a call and we'll help you with that. From our example, the example group had an indirect cost rate agreement at 14%, calculated it, and then we see the most recent negotiated IDR agreement in the appendix. So here's some tips on putting together your budget. Follow the federal object class categories. Again, I mentioned it earlier. If you don't use them within your organization, I suggest doing that now. When you're awarded, A&A is going to mandate that you use them anyway, so might as well break it down that way now. It'll make things easier too. Identify the 20% of the total project cost for non-federal share for every year of the project. This is not something that you can average out across the life of your project. Like you can't have 10% in year 1, 30% in year 2, and then 20% in year 3. It has to be a standard 20% for every year of your project. And what's also important to note is don't ever go below 20%, but don't go much over. You sometimes, the numbers work out where you can't get it to the penny to 20%. If you go a couple $100 over, that's okay. You don't want to do is go over like into 30% and up, because you will be responsible for that amount. And say something happens again, like with the COVID, people who were grantees that had to deal with COVID were having struggles meeting that amount that they have in their agreements. So say you agree to a 50% non-federal share, your partnerships or your organizations, money got tight and you can no longer provide that. A&A or the federal government, it's not going to say, oh, that's okay. Just give us the 20%. They're going to say, this is the contract you agreed to, and you have to stick to that, to whatever you agreed to. And there's, of course, penalties and interest if you don't get to that point. So just stick to the 20% without going under. And there's no bonus points or anything if you try to do more. So there's no benefit whatsoever. So stick to the 20%. Okay, so I'm moving on. The next one is work with your finance person. If you have that finance department, to go over pay scales, your fringe rates and indirect costs. Make sure you get those accurate numbers for your application, be as accurate as possible. And the next one is to clean up and scale budget templates. They have a lot of instructive text that's in there. I always suggest you delete those instructive texts. You want it to be as clear as possible. You want to delete those lines that you aren't using. You just want to have like this nice, clean, easy to read budget for your reviewers.